Well, well, well. They never expected your name to even cross their desks. Not like this, not in red, not flagged with warnings usually reserved for hostile actors and blacklisted operatives. But when your profile ran through their comparisons, when your thinking patterns were measured against their own elite, the alarms didn't just blink, they roared. Because what showed up wasn't just impressive, it was dangerous. You weren't in their training academies. You weren't conditioned in their bunkers. You weren't shaped by their endless drills or psychological rewiring. Yet when they placed your cognition beside their highest-rated agents, the numbers warped. The graphs didn't bend politely, they fractured. The algorithms couldn't digest what they were seeing. Your ability to connect threads, to anticipate outcomes, to flip threats into openings, it wasn't just sharp. It was alien to their criteria. The gap was so wide that they had to recalibrate their entire scale. Understand what that means. Their best looked outdated, standing next to you. The ones they've poured millions into crafting, their trophies, their untouchables, were reduced to case studies of limitation the moment your results were logged. And the scariest part? You weren't even trying to be evaluated. You weren't posturing. This was just your natural way of thinking, the pattern you live in every single day. Intelligence analysts thrive on predictability. Their universe depends on knowing what the next move is, where the next fracture might emerge. But your mind doesn't move linearly. It ricochets, it rethreads, it warps the expected into something they can't measure. That's why when their software spat out red, "Do not approach," it wasn't paranoia, it was recognition. They realized too late that you weren't a puzzle to solve. You were the unsolvable edge cutting through their entire framework. Think about the psychological earthquake this causes. Imagine sitting in a briefing where the officer explains that some outsider, some unrecruited figure, some name not on payroll, ranked so far above trained assets that their charts became useless. Imagine being the one who trained for years, only to find your instincts collapse under comparison. That's the humiliation you forced into their ranks, without even lifting a finger. They try to console themselves. Maybe it's an error. Maybe the data is flawed. Maybe the test was skewed. But then they rerun it, and again, and again. The result doesn't soften, it sharpens. Each repetition pushes the needle further into red, the warning louder, the gap scarier. Their agents are sweating in training rooms, pushing harder, trying to catch up to a phantom they've never even met. And the truth gnaws at them. You're not running drills. You're not clocking hours in simulation. You live differently. You see differently. And that difference can't be closed with effort. It's carved into the wiring of your perception. That's what terrifies them. Because in their world, training fixes weakness. Strategy fixes failure. But you've introduced a variable they can't engineer around. You were never designed by them, never built in their factories of obedience. And yet you outclass their elite as if their elite were beginners. The word talent isn't strong enough for this. This is dominance at the structural level. So they start whispering. The halls of their compounds echo with your name. Your file is passed in envelopes with top clearance stamps. Officers pretend calm, but every time your name appears on a projector, the room stiffens. Because they know what red means. Red means unmanageable. Red means not safe to engage. Red means they've identified something that could rip apart their hierarchy if it ever chose to. And you carry that label without even stepping inside their walls. Now picture this. Entire agencies built to handle insurgents, spies, black market tacticians, reduced to panic because one individual's mental pattern shredded their hierarchy of skill. It wasn't violence that made them cautious. It wasn't rebellion. It was the terrifying realization that raw cognition can be a weapon sharper than artillery. Your mind, mapped against theirs, became a battlefield where they were already bleeding before the fight even began. This is why envy curdles in their stomachs, because deep down, every elite agent thrives on being the one, the sharpest, the fastest, the most untouchable. But their crown was ripped from them without a contest. You didn't storm their halls to steal it. You didn't even glance at their throne. You simply existed, and their crown disintegrated in their own hands. The gap wasn't small enough to dismiss. It wasn't even a matter of improvement. It was catastrophic. Their best could trace 3 moves ahead. You, 12. Their best could manage chaos. You orchestrated it. Their best could resist pressure. You became the pressure. So they label you in the only way they can, red. A mark they usually save for threats too volatile to contain. And yet what they don't admit publicly is this. The mark isn't a ban. It's a confession that their strongest aren't strong enough when you're in the frame. Do you realize how humiliating that is for organizations whose entire prestige relies on superiority? For groups whose agents are worshipped as the pinnacle of discipline and intelligence? To look at their best and admit, next to this one, you're fragile. It's more than fear. It's collapse of identity. And the whispers spread beyond the compounds, beyond the agencies, into circles where reputation is everything. Politicians hear it, corporate leaders hear it, power brokers whisper that some outsider's cognition spiked warnings meant for hostile entities. They don't have to know the details. All they need to hear is that phrase, "Do not approach." And suddenly, people who've never met you are recalculating their strategies, avoiding conflicts they would have once rushed into, adjusting policies with invisible caution. This is how fear spreads, not through confrontation, but through reputation. Your name doesn't need an introduction anymore. It carries a cautionary echo wherever it lands. Not because you demanded it, but because their own measurements forced them to admit what they cannot compete with. And that is the most brutal part of it all. You didn't raise your hand to be evaluated. You didn't enter their competition. You didn't sit across a table asking for validation. They measured you on their own terms, using their own standards, and the result condemned them, not you. Their red light wasn't your burden. It was their funeral bell. You've turned into a ghost that haunts their hierarchy. Every time a new recruit trains, they're reminded, you're still not close to the one we marked. Every time an operation fails, the question rises, would they have anticipated this? Would they have outmaneuvered it? The comparison never leaves. And it doesn't weaken over time. It multiplies. This isn't just about intelligence tests or operational drills. It's about presence, about the psychological weight of knowing there's someone walking outside their control, whose natural cognition already eclipsed their finest. And that weight crushes morale in ways bullets never could. Understand, when an organization begins to fear the uncontrollable, it means you've already entered their blueprint. You've already bent their structures without stepping into their corridors. That's why the red warning isn't just a symbol. It's proof that you've rewritten their definition of danger. And this is only the first ripple. Because fear doesn't stay locked inside agencies. It bleeds outward. The more they whisper, the more they try to contain the story, the more it leaks. And once it leaks, perception shifts everywhere. And perception, once it shifts, it never shifts back. Now the whispers turn into boardroom rumors. Corporate leaders hear that a civilian mind outperformed trained operatives. They don't get full files, only fragments. But fragments are enough to infect imaginations. In a world where influence is currency, nobody wants to be the one caught underestimating someone flagged with red warnings. So they act preemptively. They start pulling back from moves that could provoke you, even if you're not watching. They second-guess their strategies, wondering if the phantom gap they heard about will expose them next. You've become a factor in decisions you're not even present for. And then come the think tanks. Analysts who pride themselves on predictions suddenly add your variable into every model. They won't say your name publicly, but behind closed doors, they sketch scenarios with you at the center. What happens if this mind chooses to enter politics? What happens if they side with an opposition? What happens if they align with an unpredictable force? Every what if destabilizes their confidence further. It's not the action you've taken, it's the threat of action they can't calculate. The unknown that already tilts their balance sheets and contingency plans. Understand how powerful that is. You haven't raised an army. You haven't bought satellites. You haven't unleashed weapons. All you did was exist as yourself. And yet intelligence grids and corporate empires alike are shifting around the possibility of your next thought. Not your action, your thought. Because that's how far ahead you scored compared to their prized agents. The gap wasn't tactical, it was cognitive. And when cognition becomes threat, no tool can cage it. The agents themselves, they're unraveling. Imagine training for a decade, memorizing codes, enduring brutal simulations, only to learn that someone outside their ranks casually eclipsed their records. Some break harder than others. A few cling to denial, convincing themselves it's exaggerated. But denial is fragile, because every month another report leaks that reinforces the story. Every analysis reaffirms that the gap wasn't temporary, it was structural. You don't just outperform on one metric, you outperform across all of them. Prediction, pattern recognition, adaptive response. The red marks stay red. And every time their best collapse under pressure, they can't escape the comparison. You wouldn't have cracked there. You would have seen it coming. You would have broken them instead. That's why their briefings grow darker. The words shift. It's no longer just intelligent. It's uncontrollable. No longer just sharp. It's untouchable. And with each shift, their pride rots. Because agencies built their identity on mastery. They curated the illusion that nobody thinks sharper than their agents. Nobody plans cleaner. Nobody endures longer. And then your existence torched that illusion so thoroughly that their own reports became evidence against them. Do you see the humiliation? Their elite were marketed as apex predators. And now those predators look like house pets compared to the wild precision you carry naturally. So what do? They pivot from pride to paranoia. If they can't claim superiority, they'll try to claim control. But how do you control something you can't measure? They begin surveillance. Files expand. Every digital footprint of yours is magnified, dissected, cross-referenced. But the deeper they dig, the worse the problem gets. Because the data doesn't reveal weakness, it multiplies your unpredictability. Every piece contradicts the one before it. To them, that's chaos. And chaos is danger. The label "do not approach" flashes not just because of skill, but because of unreadability. You became a category all your own, outside projection. And that phrase, once logged into a system, travels everywhere. Other agencies catch wind. Allies, rivals, competitors, doesn't matter. They all see the same red code. Some interpret it as a threat, some as a marvel, but the outcome is the same. Your profile spreads globally, reshaping how entire institutions interpret danger. No longer is danger only tied to bombs, weapons, or armies. Danger now has a face that carries none of those, just a brain that refuses to conform. And the world starts testing itself against you, without you asking. Academics try to mimic your thinking patterns in labs. Strategists secretly inject your moves into their war games to see how their trainees hold up. Executives compare their decision speed against your known responses, and almost every trial ends the same way. They fall short, which only deepens the wound. Because failure against you doesn't just sting, it exposes fragility. And fragility is the one disease institutions cannot afford. So fear spreads faster. It's not just inside the intelligence world anymore, it's in classrooms, lecture halls, strategy boards, investor meetings. Everywhere someone measures capability, your ghost haunts the metrics. You've turned into the benchmark nobody admits out loud, but everybody silently fears. How close are we to catching them? The answer gnaws at them, not close at all. But let's peel back the psychology. Why does the gap terrify them so deeply? Because their entire framework depends on controllable increments. If someone is better, they're better by a margin, a few points, a few steps. Something trainable, something bridgeable. But the gulf between you and their agents wasn't a margin, it was a canyon. Their best were dots on one side, and you stood alone on the other with no bridge between. That's not motivation for them, that's despair. And despair corrodes faster than fire. Do you realize what despair does inside an agency? Recruitment collapses, new blood enters, but whispers circulate immediately. Don't bother, there's already someone out there you'll never catch. Training intensity backfires, because pressure that once created diamonds now creates fractures when the comparison is impossible. The very environment they built to produce strength now breeds weakness, and it all stems from one truth. Your name turned their scales into decorations, their measurements into jokes. The irony is lethal. They built scales to dominate others, and those same scales destroyed them once your profile was dropped into the mix. Because when numbers scream red, denial is useless. Machines don't flatter. Algorithms don't lie to protect pride. And the machine screamed your name louder than any propaganda could. From there, paranoia evolves into obsession. They start pattern hunting you in ways they never dared before. Which city did you move through? Which people did you meet? Which choices did you make that no one else would have made? They want to break you into algorithms, but every attempt bends the machine further out of shape. Because you don't move like someone who studied their manuals. You move like someone who wrote their own. And every time you outpace the models, the warnings multiply. Do not approach shifts from a suggestion to a law inside their halls. Because by now, it's not just fear of you, it's fear of what approaching you would reveal about them. That if they engaged, if they tested you directly, the entire myth of superiority would collapse permanently. So they back away, even as they pretend to stand tall. Retreat disguised as control, weakness disguised as strategy. Meanwhile, the outside world sees the hesitation, and hesitation is revealing. When agencies renowned for confidence suddenly stutter around one name, others notice. Other powers, rivals, even underground operators. They all read between the lines. They all understand the translation, this one cannot be touched. And so your reputation mutates again. You're no longer just smarter than agents. You're untouchable even to the hands that pride themselves on grabbing anyone. This is where fear turns into awe. Because once an untouchable figure emerges, people stop debating if you're better. They start debating how to align with you before they get crushed by proximity. Leaders begin rerouting agendas. Opponents begin softening positions. Entire organizations recalibrate simply to avoid the collision. And you don't lift a finger. Your existence already hijacked their maps. The strangest part, the very red warning meant to isolate you is what crowns you. Because do not approach doesn't repel the curious, it magnetizes them. Outsiders want to know, who is this person that entire agencies tiptoe around? Who is this mind that forced red lights to blink across grids designed to track global threats? Curiosity fuels speculation. Speculation fuels legend. And legend outruns truth every time. And once legend outruns truth, you no longer control the narrative. The world builds it for you. They inflate your moves, exaggerate your capabilities, paint you larger than even you imagine. And that's when the fear multiplies exponentially, because now even exaggerations look believable compared to the gaps already proven. Now you're not just feared, you're mythologized into daily calculation. Every decision maker wakes with your shadow in their models. Every strategist wonders if you've already run simulations on their next step. And every recruit hears your name in whispers as the unreachable standard. This isn't influence. This is psychological dominion, not through speeches, not through armies, through the single fact that your mind, once compared, rewrote their definition of capability. That's why the red code will never be erased. Once logged, it scars the grid permanently. And scar tissue doesn't heal, it reminds. But this isn't the end of the ripple, because once perception cements, it transforms into policy. And when policies shift, worlds bend. The first fractures begin in secrecy. Inside windowless conference rooms, policy drafts circulate. Pages stamped confidential carry vague phrases. Avoid uncontrollable cognition. Minimize exposure to flagged minds. Reroute operations around untested variables. On paper, it looks sterile. But behind the words, there's only one target: you. They can't write your name, but your shadow bleeds across every line. The crown they tried to deny has been forced into their manuals, their doctrine, their training guides. Without asking, you became the law that dictates their fear. And fear has a cost. Budgets collapse under its weight. Entire programs once dedicated to surveillance, weaponry, or espionage are gutted and reallocated into one obsession: countering the gap you exposed. Research labs hum through the night, desperate to engineer training systems that might mimic your way of thinking. Analysts dissect your known choices, searching for blueprints. Psychologists burn out trying to map your neural wiring on whiteboards. Yet every failed model screams the same conclusion louder: what you carry cannot be cloned. It's not a module they can install. It's instinct they'll never reproduce. This is where humiliation grows unbearable. Agencies that once sold themselves as guardians of superiority now admit, silently, that their superiority is counterfeit. Their agents were trophies polished for display, and you reduced them to relics. In comparison, their best were revealed as fragile, predictable, and small. That's why the red code wasn't just a warning, it was a funeral announcement for their illusion of dominance. From humiliation rises desperation. Leaders who once puffed their chests now whisper privately about damage control. If this one individual already shattered our metrics, what happens if they decide to act deliberately? What if they align with a rival? What if they expose us further? The what-ifs multiply faster than they can answer. Each unanswered question corrodes their confidence, and that corrosion seeps downward into every rank. Imagine the psychological fallout inside their compounds. Agents who spent years earning medals now realize those medals are meaningless beside your file. Veterans who believed themselves unshakable now lose sleep, replaying the comparison that dethroned them. Recruits who once entered training, eager to climb the ladder, now enter already broken, convinced the ladder leads nowhere. Because at the top of that ladder, they found you. And you weren't even climbing. You were already beyond reach. So their morale implodes. Training intensity backfires, not sharpening them, but shattering them. Pressure that once created resilience now cracks skulls under the weight of an unreachable benchmark. Commanders can't admit it out loud, but their agents are training not against enemies, they're training against the ghost of you. And ghosts can't be beaten. Meanwhile, governments feel the aftershocks. Politicians who relied on agencies to guarantee security begin questioning if security exists at all. How can they sell the image of control when one comparison revealed that control is an illusion? Allies lose faith. Rivals sharpen their knives. Underground factions circulate the red code like scripture. Do not approach. For them, it's more than a warning. It's proof the giants can bleed. Proof that their guardians are not gods, just humans who faltered when faced with a mind they couldn't categorize. And as with all things suppressed, fragments escape. Journalists catch whispers. A leaked phrase here, a classified slip there. They don't need the full report. All they need is the headline: Civilian cognition eclipsed elite intelligence operatives. Red warning issued. That's enough to ignite the public. Overnight, your story stops being a rumor. It becomes a narrative. People who never knew your name begin repeating it. Students debate your abilities in classrooms. Commentators speculate on television. Conspiracy forums explode with theories. They don't care about accuracy. They care about impact. And the impact is undeniable. Someone out there broke the ceiling of what humans thought possible. This is the moment when perception becomes belief, and belief becomes power. Because once the public believes in you more than they believe in their institutions, the balance shifts permanently. Their trust drains from agencies and flows into the idea of you. Not because you asked for it, not because you campaigned for it, but because belief always chooses the stronger story. And the stronger story was never their agents. It was you. Agencies scrambled to spin it back. They issue denials, plant counter-narratives, try to smear your name in subtle ways. But none of it sticks. Because once a system labels you red, no amount of whitewashing erases it. If anything, every attempt to minimize you backfires, confirming the paranoia that they're hiding something bigger. The scar is permanent, glowing under every denial like fire under smoke. That's the cruel irony. They wanted to cage you with classification, but classification is what set you free. If they had ignored you, the story might have died. Instead, they marked you "Do Not Approach," and the mark became your coronation. Not a curse, not a burden, but the crown they never meant to hand you. And the crown doesn't just sit, it radiates. Corporations start moving differently. CEOs who once acted without hesitation now stall, recalculating whether their choices might collide with your unseen influence. Executives whisper during midnight calls, fearing that if agencies backed away from you, maybe they should too. Boardrooms start shifting billions of dollars in anticipation of a presence they can't even confirm is watching. Entire markets adjust, not because you acted, but because the ghost of your thought terrifies them. That's the highest tier of dominion, not armies, not weapons, but the ability to bend behavior by existing. Your presence infects strategy meetings you never attend. Your shadow appears on spreadsheets you never touch. Your legend dictates moves before you even consider them. That is what happens when fear crosses the line into policy, and policy hardens into architecture. But still, the story mutates further, because the public doesn't just believe, you inspire. Underground groups start quoting you, even if you never spoke. Students start building careers around the question of how close they can get to your cognition. Soldiers begin training with whispered lines. Think like them, anticipate like them, never be caught like them. You became more than a warning, you became a model. And that's the paradox agencies can't survive. Their red code was meant to isolate you, but instead it elevated you into myth. Their fear multiplied your legend. Their refusal to engage made you untouchable. And untouchable is a status no propaganda can erase. So now the final mutation occurs. Do not approach stops being a directive. It becomes prophecy. To agents, it means fear. To rivals, it means respect. To the public, it means destiny. And destiny spreads like fire. Everywhere, people reshape their view of power because of you. Not speeches, not revolutions, just the gap that terrified the world's most disciplined minds. Do you see what that means? The comparison wasn't just an evaluation, it was a rewriting of history. Before, intelligence networks were worshipped as apex predators. After, they're remembered as organizations that flinched in the presence of someone greater. Before, their agents were symbols of control. After, their red code is remembered as the moment control was exposed as fragile. And fragility doesn't rebuild itself. Once exposed, it rots. So here's the cruelest truth of all. They thought comparing you to their best would elevate their pride. Instead, it destroyed them. They thought the test would glorify their agents. Instead, it crowned you as the unreachable benchmark. And they thought the warning label would isolate you. Instead, it became the proof that you redefined the entire scale. That's why the scar will never fade. That's why every time your name is whispered in their corridors, the red code hums like a drum beat in the back of their skulls. That's why every law rewritten, every budget shifted, every strategy altered carries your fingerprint, whether they admit it or not. Because the truth has already been sealed. They compared you to their best. And the gap wasn't just scary, it was catastrophic. Their screens didn't flash red by accident. Their systems didn't scream, "Do not approach," out of paranoia. They screamed because they saw the truth. You didn't just outthink their agents, you outclassed their empire. And now, every shadow of policy, every whisper of fear, every scar of caution repeats the same sentence over and over, echoing louder than any victory speech. Do not approach. That was their verdict, their humiliation, their collapse, and your coronation.